Thank you, Chairman. Last speaker always has to repeat lots of things, which may also be a confirmation instead of just a boring repetition. Now, my presentation focuses on 3 points. The first is stock taking, what has happened really, because Horizon 2020 is not something that starts from scratch. It's a continuation of the Lisbon agenda, which means that things have been happening in the past, but they have not been happening as fast, as nicely, as smoothly as we would have liked them. So it means there are more barriers there, and it would be good to look at them, identify them, see how we can correct them in the future. And then I want to finish by a few words about the way ahead and the famous questions that everybody was asked to raise. Stock taking. Well, stock taking, it's clear, I think Pat Freyne has already mentioned it. Lots of things have happened. There are significantly more incentives adopted at the level of the member states and at the level of the European Commission regarding knowledge circulation and knowledge transfer than in the past. We have an instrument to monitor what is happening at the member state level, which is called the AeroWatch Trenchard Inventory, which is funded by the European Commission and regularly monitors what type of new measures, with what budgets, what objectives, what eligible costs are adopted in the member states. And if you pursue this database, which has more than 1,000 policy incentives in it, you can very clearly see that we pass from a situation where universities and businesses were incentivized by one-to-one support measures. So company comes to the member state's ministry or agency and says, I want to do a research project. Okay, up to 50% grant as allowed by state aid rules would be granted to the company, and similar incentives to universities. You see more and more now that all incentives take the form of some kind of collaboration. So there is really significantly more done from the side of the governments or agencies, and this can be manifested and monitored in the inventory of measures adopted. And there is more knowledge circulation, knowledge transfer. There is no doubt about that. I think, again, previous speakers have spoken about that. And there are more intermediaries, not only the knowledge and technology transfer offices, but agencies that are created with a mandate to improve knowledge transfer. So we do have a few interesting developments towards the direction that we want them to take. However, they are not enough, they are not sufficiently ambitious, they have not reached the level that we would have liked to reach in Europe, and we always have the benchmark of the US. Why is Stanford and the core of so many successful startups and what we call YOLIs in economics, so very rapidly growing firm, gazelles, and so on. And we do not have that in Europe. So we need to do more for technology transfer. We need to raise the ambitions of our programs, but we should not neglect that things have been happening. And there are still many worries, and I think this is very clearly manifested in the consultation, where you see lots of recommendations, ideas, things to do. Now, you'll allow me to say that when I read and heard about the consultation, it is clear that universities and research centers have reacted in an absolute majority. We have heard less from companies, and I think in the next document that the Commission will prepare, it will be very interesting to see what companies suggest and what the universities suggest. And I think this is important if we want to understand the barriers. Some barriers are common to all. Others are not shared by the actors interested. I think that the barriers shared by everybody are those that sociologists actually are studying, and they can be resumed under the name resistance to change. Whenever you have a sort of happy, functioning, if not perfectly functioning situation, and there are some ideas, incentives, legal measures, proposals that come to shift the sand, to make the ground a little unstable, then the first reaction of all actors is stop. That's fine. Or, change may bring with it things that we don't want or we don't need. As a university professor, I can tell you the struggling we have to convince our older faculty colleagues, but occasionally also younger ones, that the third mission of the universities is important, is something that is not self-evident at all. We may discuss it in public consultation, we may report it in reports to the Commission or the OECD, but when you come to a faculty meeting and you are judging the promotion of a younger colleague, and the younger colleague has worked on cooperation with the local community, with the European Commission, or for an individual company, then immediately the reaction is, okay, but this is not scientific publications, so he should have done more for scientific publications. And there are divergent expectations in that respect. So change, even if it is pursued or accepted or just tolerated, is not perceived in the same way by everybody. And I think the most important thing to understand in terms of barrier is that there is a misalignment of incentives. Incentives for individual researchers may be different than incentives for the department or for the university as a whole. Incentives for university research may not always be aligned with the interests of the companies. I just need to refer to the excellent example of ABB, what I heard, I'm sure the colleague who proposed to you not to write the proposal had in the back of his head not only that he wanted to write the proposal alone, but he was doing you a favor, because you don't have to invest resources in writing a proposal which is uncertain yet. You don't know if you're going to receive it. So this is a clear misalignment of incentives. He thought he was offering you an incentive. You thought it was a disincentive. And I think that bridging all these misalignments is a very, very important barrier. So insufficient funding, insufficient strategies, insufficient matching opportunities, everything that is mentioned in the consultation process is correct. But it's not only that. I think a lot more important is to understand the incentives and to make this matchmaking into a really successful marriage, living on love after the incentives have been adopted. And this brings me to the way ahead. What can we do in the next 8 years to go a step further? Well, we need to proceed with the suggested changes in the ERA objectives and documents. There is no doubt about that. But for the strategic relationship, we really need to focus more on the time horizon for change. And there again, I was very, very happy to see the slide presented at the end by Pat Frayne saying that, when it's more, you can only really judge a technology transfer office when it's 10 years old. And I agree with that. My question is, of course, now in case you find out that after 10 years it's not successful, what do you do? And I think there again, we may find ourselves attacked by the business sector saying, once you create an organization, an intermediary, then you keep it forever, independently of what an evaluation says. So, my question, if we want to go ahead more ambitiously, we really need to decide what is knowledge transfer. Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? So, the inventory shows us that there is more knowledge transfer one way or another towards the one side or the other. Just to remind you of what Professor Tsipouri was saying this morning, is it an efficiency or an equity objective? And more importantly, what policymakers have in the back of their head, or even clearly ahead, is it a way to increase diffusion, to increase spillovers, and in that form, increase the social returns of investment? Because the knowledge circulation means a broader diffusion, more companies can adopt it, less appropriability, more social returns on investment. And all these three dimensions are there. So we need to reconcile them somehow. And the best way to reconcile them is to look at what institutional economics call a change of routines, a change of informal rules. I think one of the merits of the Bayh-Dole Act, which was mentioned earlier, is that it changed the state of mind in some of the US universities, and I think we always need to remember that when we look at the US as a benchmark, we measure ourselves against the best US universities. So there we have a change. The routines, the state of mind, the way people think and interact and drink coffee with each other is different. And I think this is a 10-year horizon. I think the real ambition would be to look at 2020 backwards and say, well, these people in 2012, they didn't like cooperation and technology transfer. How is that possible? Couldn't they see the merit? Couldn't they see the mutual benefit? But in order to be able to do that, to change the mindsets and to see the mutual benefit, we really have to create mutual benefit. And sometimes I have the feeling that rhetoric and policy documents speak of the mutual benefit as if it was something automatic, which is not. I tried to say that the misalignment of incentives can very often be a barrier and not a way to think of common interests. What I see for the future as interesting ideas to work towards a change of routines is a cooperation for growth, this whole idea that despite the austerity measures, we need to target growth again in Europe, and the only way to target Europe is aligned incentives. And I also think that the focus on the global challenges and the entrepreneurial state, which unfortunately Mariana Mazzucato could not present this morning, this may change the landscape of the future. So we do have some evidence of positive results of the past, some good new ideas, and I think what we really need now is to raise ambitions, to understand things better, and to use evaluation and benchmarking and the metrics, again, that Patrick Freyne was mentioning more effectively. Thank you.